Good morning, everybody. So today we're working on Isoarea closed hexagon twists. And these Isoarea hexagon twists you can have fluffed up to make these really interesting textures. We're going to be practicing on this pattern, not this exact result, but getting the structure down, learning how to build it further out. So right off the bat, I want us to look at the twist itself. So I've got these two demo twists. One of these is an Isoarea closed hexagon twist, and the other is an Isoarea open hexagon twist. And so what we've got here is this structure, and we can see, we can pull it out, put it back in. And when I'm pulling this out and putting it in, you can notice that there's those guide valleys, like we saw in the Isoarea closed square last week. And those guide valleys are going away as we flatten our twist. So those guide valleys are kind of the key to getting this twist into place. And for the closed hexagon, you can fluff that up, re-emphasizing those guide valleys to make that little rose shape. And since it's Isoarea, it's the same on the back. You can fluff it up from the back as well, although you can't fluff it on both sides at the same time. It just would come apart. So that's the closed version. Then the open version is taking these pleats from, or the new off-grid folds from the open hexagon twist, and basically doing the same thing. So what we're looking at here is a closed or open hexagon twist that has every other pleat going around flipped mountain and valley to create that Isoarea effect. And since it's flipping from an existing twist, what I realized this morning is that you can get to this rosebud pattern from an existing tessellation just by changing the pleats. And that existing tessellation is alternating closed hexagons and triangles. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to bring up the crease pattern for both of those. Well, and here we see my OBS settings being different from normal. And so I'm on the triaxial weave, the standard alternating closed hexagons and closed triangles that Fujimoto discovered way back over half a century ago. And if I switch to the other crease pattern, you see it matches up exactly. So switching back and switching again, it matches the same lines exactly. It just changes which ones are mountains and valleys. Pretty cool. So we're going to be working with the Isoarea form, and I'm going to be using a 24-fold triangle grid on a hexagon. So we'll have 24 divisions from top to bottom. That does mean a division of 3 in there along the way. And we're going to start folding what we can. So I'll get my pens out and start marking up paper. First thing I'm going to do is identify the center point. And with the center point identified, and I'm doing that by following 2 grid lines in from the corners, now I can zoom in and focus right on that particular area to show what's going on in the crease pattern. So I'm going to have 3 of my mountain folds pointing straight in at the center. And then the other 3, and I'll orient it so I match the crease pattern from before. Actually, technically speaking, it would be this orientation, but regardless. Then I'm going to have my valleys that are next to those, and this is going to be a right-handed isoarea twist. And then I'm going to have my other 3 pleats with the valleys coming straight in and the mountains being further out. So I'm getting these alternating V's of mountain and valley, and I'm going to have some extensions. So the parts of the central hexagon that's being twisted are also going to alternate mountain and valley. So that's the crease pattern of the isoarea closed hexagon twist. And now how do we fold that? Well, I'm going to start by emphasizing my mountains. And for this example, I want to be careful to keep that center point down like a valley. So I'm emphasizing my mountains, but I'm keeping the central point down. So this is different from how we would do the regular closed hexagon twist, where we would bring the center point up. This one, we really want that center down. I'm bringing up my mountains and making sure that they're laying over the correct valleys as well. Now, 3 of these mountains are the ones that were coming straight into the center. Let's see if we can identify those. Those are going to be the vertical coming down towards me, and then the 2 evenly spaced from that. So now I'm keeping the center down as a valley, but I'm also lifting my center. So the central point is down, but the center as a whole is up. And I'm going to fully fold those 3 pleats that are going straight into the center that had not been reversed. And with those folded, I can lay the center back down onto the table, and now emphasize the valleys of the remaining folds and make sure that they're poking down and in. So I'm going to mark those 3 standard pleats to make sure that we know that these are the ones that did not change orientation. And then from there, I'm going to continue folding, and I'll check in with the chat, make sure I can see any questions. And so here we are. It's time to place the next triangle, and I can look at the existing tessellation and say, okay, I'm going to need 2 spacings along this pleat that was not reversed, that are flat, and then the triangle will be on the next one. Another way of saying that is, okay, one spacing will be hidden underneath. I'm going to need 2 spaces to find the center of the triangle. And I can also say this valley is going to be 2 spaces from the flipped pleats mountain. So all of those measures will work. And the structure that we have, so we saw that it's the same exact tessellation as the alternating closed hexagons and triangles on the same side, and just with some pleats flipped. So that's going to hold for how we fold it too. So I'll have this triangle, and what's actually going to happen is, since every other pleat is flipped, every other triangle is going to be on the opposite side. And interesting tie-in to the paper I'll be presenting at Bridges later this week, we needed to have 3 pleats shift from the 3 hexagons surrounding the triangle that got moved to the back to get it onto the back. So there's a little parallel. So I'm going to take this and flip it vertically, so bottom to top, and I'm going to apply that same rule of leaving 2 spaces between one mountain and the next valley, and that will set up my next closed triangle twist. And at the intersection of these 2 pleats from closed triangles, I'm going to have my next isoarea closed hexagon twist. So these 2 are coming together, forming this point, which is exactly the same as these 2 pleats coming together and forming this point. So I can say that the closed hole is going to need to be in there. I can also say that this hexagon and each of these triangles is in a position of 3-fold rotational symmetry. So whatever happens on one side of, say, this triangle hole is also going to happen on both of the other sides. And so I can say, okay, 2 spaces out from this mountain, I'm going to have a valley. And so 2 spaces out from the mountain, I'm going to have a valley, which means that I'm going to have a mountain 1 further out from that. So far, things have been going pretty smoothly. This is the point where things become trickier because we don't have that free motion that we had in the beginning to get that first isoarea hexagon. So I'm going to open this up, and we know already the locations of 3 of the pleats going into this isoarea closed hexagon. Therefore, we also know the location of the center of the twist, and it's going to be down in there. So we've got, and this is going to look quite messy, we've got this one wedge coming in, pointing down towards the center. We're going to have another wedge coming up along the pleat that we already marked and coming out this way. And I'm leaving that center point down so I can bring up the 3rd wedge. And don't worry, we'll be seeing this many more times. So the key here is that I identified the center point, I left it down, I found my 3 wedges, and then I can set up the Rosebud first, and then let everything tuck under to squash. And I made sure that I had 3 pleats identified to really fix in place the location of what I was working with. So next up, I'm going to somewhat arbitrarily choose to stay on this side of the paper. I know that every time I add a new hexagon, I need to have added 2 triangles. I can see that this pleat is analogous to this pleat around this hexagon because it's every other one is the same. And so it is also going to have a triangle on this side. It's going to leave 2 spaces between the existing mountain and the valley. And so I can set up my new triangle twist. And I can also say the same thing about this pleat relative to this one. And so I can have those 2 spaces between the mountain and the nearest valley and set up a closed triangle twist in there. And this is causing a bit of a mess over in these pleat overlaps, but I'm just getting things flat enough to squash my triangle twist. And I'm going to then open out everything here. And one of the things that I can say is, well, on this side of the triangle, there were 2 spaces from the valley to the mountain. So on this side, there's also going to need to be 2 spaces from this valley underneath to the next mountain. So that already gets me my next wedge. And then one of the rules that I can use here is that this little mountain coming out is only going to go 1 spacing because we're alternating mountain and valley around that central hexagon. And we can see I'm leaving the center point of that hexagon down. This is helping me find the next mountain going up, the next mountain going to the right. And here I really do need to pop this up so I can shift this over and making sure that, and that's looking quite messy in the middle, but I can poke it with my bone folder a bit, get it to clean up. But what I'm making sure of is that the pleat that is coming from the triangle on the same side is able to flatten and tuck in. And in fact, all 3 of those equivalent pleats are coming down before I fully flatten the other 3 pleats. So when we're setting up these tessellations, we always want to be flattening the pleats that are not reversed, and then the pleats that are reversed, we want to be flattening these rosebuds as we make them, and then we can puff them up later. So from here, I am going to want to flip the paper back over, and here I have a choice. Am I going to put in those 2 triangles, outer and then inner, or inner and then outer? And yeah, either way will work out. Also, I'm noticing that this pleat had something stuck a little backwards, so I'll pull that out. And I'm going to take a look in here. Also, it can be pretty confusing when you're just looking at these to tell the difference between the closed triangle and the Isoarea closed hexagon. So just make sure to double check everything that you're looking at to make sure it's what you actually think it is. So we're going to have this valley and this valley as our references, and we can fold those really in either order. I'm going to stick with the order that I did on the other side and do the outer one first and then the inner one, so we can see that one more time. And again, I'm just making sure that I can get this triangle squashed. What I did is kind of set up a three-way intersection, but there's also another pleat going through it. But again, that will be undone as soon as I go to make the next twist. So in here, I want to open up, and first thing I'm doing is setting up my second wedge. So I've already got my first wedge here, I've got my second wedge here, and then I'm going to take this line that extends from the first wedge, pop it down into the valley, and I can see inside there the center point. I'm going to make sure that, and look where I'm pushing from underneath, that center is split three ways. And then I can bring up the third wedge. Now I'm going to make sure that the valley under here is going all the way to the next valley, making that rosebud shape, and then I can squash it the rest of the way down. From here, I'm going to repeat this all the way around the central hexagon. So I'm going to flip over, set up first one triangle, and then the other. And I will say that the ease that I'm doing this is built on a lot of trial and error. I mean, the first time that I folded this tessellation was not this easy. I'll go ahead and say that right now. This is not what you should expect your first time to look like. So opening this up, I'm setting up my fourth pleat and identifying my center. My center is going to be in there. And this point is going to need to be popped down as a valley. And when that's popped down as a valley, I'm also running a valley all the way out from that center point to the edge of the paper. So it's going to need a mountain next to it, and that mountain is going to need to be part of a wedge structure. And then I make sure that this valley is running all the way in. And you see how that really opened up my center. And I'm going to continue emphasizing those 3 that have not been flipped so that the 3 that have been flipped can then close on top. And now I'll flip over, put in my next 2 triangles. Again, reasoning by analogy around what already exists around a particular isoarea closed hexagon. So this one is on the analogous pleat, and likewise this pleat is analogous to those other 2. And so we've got this standard hexagons and triangles approach of putting in 2 triangles for each new hexagon. And that is going to stay consistent no matter how many repeats of this you fold. You want to work in a ring around the center, adding in 2 triangles, then a new hexagon, and one thing to be careful of, there's so many things in this tessellation that are kind of hidden underneath. You always want to be careful that your folds are starting and stopping at grid intersections, that your valleys are staying on grid lines. This can be a little bit harder to keep track of in this tessellation. So coming around to the 6th isoarea closed hexagon in this loop around the central one, I noticed that I'm going to need 1 triangle on this side and 1 triangle on the other side. So what I'm going to do is set up the triangle on this side, and basically remember that I'm going to need another triangle on the other side to get everything to play nice while I am setting up my twist. And I'm starting to see where that other triangle is going to need to be, because this is kind of a mess, but at least I can see there needs to be a triangle wrap there. And I'm going to bring these kind of up so I can straighten things out and get my valleys in the right place. You can see it's all kinds of messy inside there. And this is where I'm going to flip over and use my bone folder slash actually take a look at it. Make sure that things are playing nice before I come back and try to get everything smushed. Well, not smushed, but tucked into place. And I'm going to check it out on the other side too before I squash things. And that's looking pretty good. So the more constraints I have on this, the harder it is to get that twist to actually go where it needs to go. And I'll squash my remaining triangle as well. So that is pretty much as I can get on this grid. And conveniently for me, this is the same exact paper size and grid size that I had for the the other tessellation, and you can see it's an exact match. Like perfect border match, perfect everything. It doesn't get more exact than that. So that is yet another piece of evidence for these two tessellations being extremely close relatives. It's just flipping some pleats over, and you get this very different result, and we're able to then go in and pop open these rose structures. And here again, we need to be careful that we're pulling open the roses and not the closed triangle twists. And we can get these fascinating structures from what's at heart a fairly simple pattern. So we've got one kind of hexagon and one kind of triangle. Notice the triangles are on both sides because the hexagon on its own is more or less on both sides. So that is Rosebud, is the pattern, and the closed Isoarea hexagon twist is what we used to make it. There's a lot of other things you can fold with this twist. And one thing to keep in mind, so you'll notice that our border here is really jagged, but my demo piece has a flat border. And this is because this demo piece was folded with, like if you take a hexagon and you go to folded grid, this one was folded in half with grid lines from corner to opposite corner. This one was folded in half perpendicular to the edge. So we have 3 edges pairing up with the other 3 edges. And this is what I call a diagonal grid on a hexagon. And if you do that, then you will get these nice edges on the border. And it just so happens to line up with this particular tessellation. So happy folding, everyone. And I hope to see your folds of this soon. Tag me at Gathering Folds on Instagram or Facebook. And one more thing to mention, there's so much more to learn in the realm of advanced techniques and twists in tessellations. So I have a course, Advanced Twist Techniques, that goes over all of these different options with updates every year as I figure out more of them. So check out the link below to see more about advanced twist techniques. Happy folding, y'all. And next week there will not be a live stream because I am traveling, but the week after I will be back to talk about another advanced